Aesthetics of Mysticism or Mysticism of Aesthetics, the approach of Kashmir Shaivism, Bettina Baumer. I offer homage to the supreme and unsurpassable deity consciousness, the wonder of every new insight shining in its own light, who reveals the trinity of the created beings, divine energy and Shiva, holding them in her heart. Abhinavagupta, Mangala Shloka 3, Paratrishika Vivarana. We begin this reflection on the relationship between aesthetics and mysticism in the so-called Kashmir Shaivism, and especially in Abhinavagupta, by invoking the great goddess consciousness in the words of the third Mangala Shloka of Abhinavagupta's Paratrishika Vivarana. Whether we understand her Daya as the heart of the supreme consciousness, herself, in which even the trinity Trika is contained and revealed, Jaideva Singh, or as the heart of the author, Abhinavagupta, in which she places the three, Nara, Shakti, and Shiva, are Gnoli. This verse reveals the wonderful nature of goddess consciousness. She is herself of the nature of Pratibha Chamakriti, the sudden intuitive delight or wonder of, at the same time, aesthetic and mystical experience. It implies that the Trinity or Trika would not be known unless the flash of this intuition is realized in the heart, and ultimately the heart of the goddess consciousness, Devisvatma Samviti, verse 2, is not different from the heart of the devotee or sadhaka, hence the ambivalence. Much has been said and written about the unity and yet difference of the aesthetic and the mystical experience in Abhinavagupta and his predecessors as well as followers, and I should not repeat well-known facts, but on the background of all this, I want to focus on the question expressed in the title of this paper, Mysticism of Aesthetics or Aesthetics of Mysticism. The aesthetic experience has to do with the senses, Indriya Karana, whereas the mystical experience transcends the senses and reaches the unsurpassable, absolute. Anuttara. There are three levels where this question can be discussed: on the metaphysical level, on the level of aesthetic or mystical experience, and on the level of artistic or spiritual practice. Obviously, the last is meant to lead to the second and ultimately get merged into the reality expressed by the first. One could start either from above, from the theoretical, or below, from the experiential, and the result reached would be the same. In fact, the three levels are totally interdependent. Sarvatmakam. Obviously, it is not possible to deal with all the three levels in all the traditions and texts, and here we can only throw light on some aspects which may have received less attention in the study of aesthetics. All the points raised in this paper have to be placed in the context of the great mandala of the Trika system. Like in a mandala, we have first to draw the lines, and then place the colored powder in the various compartments. Metaphysical. Since we are expressing ideas which have been conceived in Sanskrit through the medium of a foreign language, which has been imprinted by a different tradition, we have to be careful in using certain concepts. The very words aesthetics and mysticism have a history of their own in the European tradition, which cannot be ignored when using them. But a conscious use of such terms can also lead to a mutual enrichment of traditions and to a clarification, as we can see in many works of A.K. Kumaraswamy, for instance. Aesthetics has to do with beauty, but what do we understand by beauty? One of the basic definitions of beauty in the European tradition is harmony. This opposite, ugliness, is disharmony, dissonance. Harmony is an agreement of the beautiful thing and the source of beauty, God, and hence the beautiful thing is a reflection of the original. For the definition of these basic concepts, we may quote Thomas Aquinas. In existing things, the beautiful and the beauty are distinguished. For the beautiful is what participates in beauty, and beauty is the participation of the first cause, which makes all things beautiful. The creature's beauty is naught else but a likeness, similitudo, of divine beauty participated in by all things. Kumaraswamy, in his note, relates this likeness to the idea of reflection, but he does not elaborate. In the context of Kashmir Shaivism, The conception of the world as abhasa or pratibimba of the divine original, bimba, would be the first starting point in a metaphysics of beauty. As for the difference between participation and reflection, the latter is never understood in the sense of an illusory appearance by Abhinavagupta. It is interesting to note that in the context of the four upayas, the theory of pratibimba is used in the highest, sambhavapaya, where everything is related to and every means leads to a full participation in the divine reality. The description Abhinavagupta gives in his Tantrashara 3 of pratibimba is far from a simple theory of reflection as appearance. Besides the example from which the very word is derived, i.e., a reflection in the mirror, where the reflection is the entire world and the mirror is pure consciousness, he also uses comparisons from sense experience, smell, taste, touch, and sound. Let us consider the example of sound. Pratibimba is compared to echo resounding in space. This echo is not the original sound, because the one who has produced it bears it as if it were the voice of somebody else, but in fact it is his own voice. What Abhinavagupta wants to say in all these examples is that the pratibimba is in reality not different from bimba, the original. But this Advaita is not illusionistic. It allows for a difference which makes the aesthetic experience possible. It comes closer to participation in the scholastic sense. Abhinavagupta summarizes his idea of pratibimba thus: just as all this appears like a reflection, in the same way the universe appears in the light of the Supreme Lord. If you ask, what is the original image, what is reflected here, I answer, it is nothing. You further ask, has then the reflection no cause? Are you asking for a cause and how it is reflected? This cause is nothing but the energy of the Supreme Lord, called freedom. Ultimately, it is the Lord who contains in himself all the reflected reality, and whose self is the all, because the universe is of the nature of consciousness. It is the locus of the revelation of consciousness. Since the universe is reflected in consciousness, this is the cause of all reflections. Tantrasara 3. Thus the first connotation of beauty is related to reflection, likeness, and participation in the original, perfect image of pure consciousness, but not in a static sense, because manifestation is produced by the very Svatantriya Shakti of the Lord. What this means in the field of mystical experience will be seen later. Another aspect of beauty as harmony in the Western tradition is called consonantia in Latin. Note the musical implication of the term. Let the first consider the scholastic definition by Thomas Aquinas, who is elaborating on Dionysius the Areopagite. Again he explains the outer part, via that God is the cause of the harmony, consonantia, that is in things. But this harmony in things is of two sorts. The first, as regards the order of creatures to God, and he touches upon this when he says that God is the cause of harmony, for that it summons all things to itself, inasmuch as he or it turns about all things toward himself or itself, as being their end. As was said above, wherefore in the Greek beauty is called kalos, which is derived from to summon, and second, harmony is in creatures accordingly, as they are ordered to one another, and he touches upon when he says that it gathers together all in all, to be one and the same, which may be understood in the sense of the Platonists, via that higher things are in the lower by participation, the lower in the higher immanently, and thus all things are in all. And since all things are thus found in all according to some order, it follows that all are ordered to one and the same last end. We need not simply identify these concepts, because each carries with it its own associations, but similarly, samatha or samya is the central concept of harmony in Kashmir Shaivism. Again, samatha is not a static identity or sameness. It implies a harmony, balance, equilibrium, and also a sense of proportionality, according to the meaning of sama. It implies the same interrelatedness of all things, high and low, shavatmakam. The goal of Shaiva Yoga is this very samatha, which has all these implications, ranging from the supreme mystical level to the level of social equality. The very first verse of the Paratrishika opens with the question of the Devi addressed to Bhairava. Anutaram katham deva, sadhya, Kalikasidam, Yenavijnata Matrena, Kechare Samatam Vrajet. It would be worthwhile to comment on Abhinavagupta's exposition of the word Kachari Samata in his Vivarana. After stating the metaphysical meaning, he comes down to the sense experience and the aesthetic experience. The metaphysical meaning is clear. Therefore, homogeneousness, samya or samata, of the Kachari Shakti constitutes liberation. This homogeneousness, sameness of the Kachari Shakti is due to the awareness of the essential nature of the Anuttara, i.e., the unsurpassable absolute reality, which is constantly present and which arises from the bliss of the recognition of the completion of the union of the divine Shakti with Shiva, and acquires stability by the realization of the consciousness of bliss of both. Ubaya Vimarsanandarudi. Abhinavagupta then elaborates on the process of creativity as well as the sensual experience, which brings about this state of Kachari Samata. It is interesting that he not only describes the process in the case of a pleasurable experience, such as love or hearing of sweet music, but also in the case of grief or suffering. If the heart is attuned to the oneness of Kachari, Sardayata, even painful experiences can lead to the same state of harmony. Harmony is always between two or more entities, and here the ultimate state of samatha is that between Shiva and Shakti, representing all the polarities in the universe, which is experientially achieved in the consciousness of the yogin or sadhaka. What Abhinavagupta describes in this context is a process of integration of sense experience. It may be erotic, aesthetic, or an intense experience of pain, with the supreme and unalterable divine consciousness, Nishtaranga, Dhruvapada. Thus it also implies the integration of a fleeting emotion with a permanent state of mystical identification. Here it is not a question of a clear-cut distinction between the aesthetical and the mystical, but on the basis of an ongoing spiritual practice. The sense experience triggers the mystical realization described as Kalikasiddhi and Kachari Samata, Paratrishika Volume 1. We have mentioned two essential characteristics of beauty: reflection or participation, and harmony. The third quality, which is universally valid, is that beauty has to do with light, clarity, or transparency. Things are beautiful insofar as they radiate or reflect light, both in a physical as well as metaphysical sense. Pure beauty is always transparent and allows an intelligibility of its own, depending on the medium. This is a very vast subject which I can only hint at without elaborating. Again, to quote Thomas Aquinas, who comments on Dionysius, saying that God is the cause of harmony and lucidity, applying the same principle proportionately in other beings, we see that any of them is called beautiful according as it has its own generic incidity, claritatem sui generis, spiritual or bodily, as the case may be, and according as it is constituted with due proportion. How God is the cause of this lucidity he shows, saying that God sends out upon each creature, together with a certain flashing, quodam fulgore, a distribution of his luminous radii, which is the front of all light, which flashing distributions, traditiones, are to be understood as a participation of likeness, and these distributions are beautifying, that is to say, are the makers of the beauty that is in things. Now light, prakasha, is the main characteristic of the divine nature in Kashmir Shaivism, as in most Indian systems, but this pure light of consciousness is not experienced without its reflection, vimarsha. It is in this dynamic relationship of prakasha and vimarsha that the aesthetic experience is to be placed, where just as we have seen in the case of Kachari Samata, the beauty of the reflection is thrown back onto the source of beauty, the source of light, prakasha. The entire manifestation is nothing but an expansion of the original light appearing in all the forms of the universe. Similarly, Bhairava, who is in the nature of light, i.e., spiritual light of consciousness, is self-proved, beginningless, primal, and ultimate in all respects, and present in everything. What else is to be said regarding him? He displays his light identically, saprakasham prakashayati, in the expansion of all the categories of existence, example the 36 tattvas, all the objective phenomena, bhavas, and views them all as himself, tathaiva chavimarsati, in his self-delight, kamatkaratve, which never vanishes, anapeta, that which is this perception in that way, i.e. as identical with himself, makes his self-revelation, basana, evident in lakhs, crores, 10 crores, Arbuda, 10 arbudas of endless future, bhavi manifestations and absorptions to be brought about by Maya, and thus he appears in those very forms. Tatharupam eva bhavati, metaphors. To show that these are not abstract ideas, we could analyze here the use of artistic metaphors, which are not accidental but central to Kashmir Shaivism. Every darshana has a set of basic metaphors which serve to illustrate the philosophical truths. Not by chance the two frequently used metaphors are taken from painting on the one hand and drama on the other. Music does not serve as a metaphor, though it pervades a lot of Abhinavagupta's speculations on the power of the word, vak, mantra, etc. The metaphor of painting illustrates the idea of abhasha and of the world as an image, Yagachitra, created by the divine artist. It does not have illusionistic overtones as the same image has in Vedanta. The image is real and yet entirely dependent on the freedom of the creator. Here, the Svatantriya Shakti is the main characteristic of the divine as well as human artist. Art can only be created by a spirit of freedom. The implication of the metaphor of painting is obviously the beauty of the work of art, which produces a sense of wonder, chamatkara, and leads the observer to a state of identification. The entire Bimba Pratibimba Vada is related not only to an image in a mirror, but to the metaphor of painting. The second artistic metaphor used is that of drama, Jagannatya. Leaving aside here the Abhinava Bharati, we may reflect on the Shiva Sutras, which elaborate on this simile, starting from the sutra Nartaka Atma, the self is an actor, dancer. According to the commentator Ksemaraja, this is said of the self-realized yogin who becomes one with the Lord. Samaraja explains his action as being Svaparishpanda Lilaya, playful by its own inner vibration, which manifests itself in movements of dance, a dance that is far from being a merely external movement, for it is based on his being established in his innermost hidden essential nature. Antarviguhitashvasvarupavashtam bamulam. Now all the terms used assume a double meaning. In this context, Semaraja quotes a verse of Bhattanarayana's Stavachintamani 59. O Shiva, you have produced the drama of the three worlds, containing the real seed of all creation, and the germ within it. Having performed its prelude, is there any other artist but you who is capable of bringing it to its conclusion? Shiva is here the artist, Kavi, both author and stage director of the universal drama, in which he is also the actor. All the parts of a Sanskrit drama are also parts of the world drama. For instance, bija and seed is in drama the source of the plot contained in some illusion, while in the world the seed is Maya, the source of manifestation. Garbha, germ, or womb is the schema of the dramatic action, while in the created world, Garbha corresponds to Prakriti, the womb of all existence. Prastava is the introductory part of the play corresponding to creation, and Samhara its completion, corresponding to the reabsorption or dissolution of the universe. Adding another quotation from Utpaladeva's Ishvara Pratyabhijna, probably Vivriti, since it is not traceable, Ksemaraja concludes by saying that the Lord is the producer of the world drama, who remains awake even when the whole world is asleep, i.e. at the stage of Samhara. The verse of Stavachintamani, following the one quoted by Ksemaraja, verse 60, adds to the meaning of the divine actor and stage director, for there Shiva is praised as the one who makes the real unreal and the unreal real, being both free and unfree. The Shiva Sutra further identifies the stage of the inner or outer drama with the inner self or individual soul. rango antaratma, because the place where the self takes delight with the intention of exhibiting the play of the world drama is the stage, i.e., the place where the self adopts the various roles. The three levels of meaning are here the external theater stage, the universal stage of the world drama, and the yogic stage of the inner self, bhumika, again in the meaning of stages in yoga and roles of the actor. The purport of the simile is the spiritual or yogic level, as also in the following sutra, where the senses are called the spectators, prakshakanindriyani. Samaraja comments, the senses like eyes, etc., of the yogi witness inwardly their inmost self full of the delight in exhibiting the world drama. By the development of the performance of the drama, they provide to the yogi fullness of aesthetic rapture in which the sense of difference has disappeared. Here it becomes clear that the simile is not merely a pretext for explaining the inexplicable, as in Vedanta, because the play is a real play of delight even for the yogin. The senses are here not denied, but they assume the role of spectators of the world drama that is reflected in the inner consciousness on the interior stage. Interiority, antarmukata, is not opposed to playful manifestation, it is rather the condition for the fullness of aesthetic delight. Chamatkara rasasampurnata. Since the world drama is really enacted by the Lord himself, the yogin can enjoy its beauty and, instead of being distracted by external multiplicity, dissolve any sense of separateness due to this experience of joy. Vigalita, Vibhagan. Here, the aesthetical and the mystical rapture become identical, the yogin being able to enjoy things more fully due to his rootedness in interiority. Aesthetical, mystical experience. On this background, we come now to the main question that this paper wants to raise, i.e., the mutual enlightenment of the aesthetical and the mystical. One of the key terms in both is chamatkara, chamatkirti, or Vishmaya, the wonder or surprise of a delightful experience, an unexpected overwhelming of joy. Chamatkirti cannot be the outcome of any deliberate effort. It is always spontaneous, even if it is preceded by an effort of artistic expression on the one hand and of spiritual practice on the other. Lillian Silburn describes Chamatkara as the rapture proper to the Sardaya who appreciates the drama and to the mystic who at a much higher degree enjoys divine bliss, but in both cases the impression is spontaneous. It does not depend on any effort. The guru in the case of the second, or the actor in the case of the first, do nothing but lifting the veil and removing the obstacle, so that the inner ecstasy wells up immediately. As in the Mangala Shloka cited in the beginning, Pratibha and Chamakirti are intimately related. Abhinavagupta has an interesting passage in the Tantraloka. In the measure in which the uncreated reality exceeds, to the same degree the wonder of delight, Chamatkara, increases. Those who rest in the intuitive consciousness, pratibha, consisting in the fullness of the first letters, certainly attain poetic and rhetoric gifts. But he who rests in pure consciousness in its highest form, devoid of any limitations of conventions, what is it that he does not know? What is it that he is not able to do? Tantraloka 11:76-80. Here it is the same illuminating power of pratibha, an aspect of pure consciousness, which leads to poetic creation in the field of expression, and to unlimited knowledge and activity in the spiritual field. Both share in the same wonder of delight. Abhinavagupta develops this idea more extensively in his Praratrashika Vivarana, in the context of the phonemes of language and of musical sound. At the end of a very revealing passage on the effect of sounds, he summarizes his views, starting with the identification of Chamatkara with the Supreme Shakti, the Supreme Power who is Bharavi, whose characteristic is wondrous delight, issuing from her unique autonomy shines externally by herself. Any experience of Chamatkara, whether aesthetical or mystical, is therefore a participation in the Shakti, who is characterized as being immersed, avesha, in the one rasa of absolute freedom, svatantriya. The difference and or unity of the aesthetical and the mystical can be observed clearly in the case of spiritual practices, dharana, which use the aesthetic experience for a mystical end. We may see examples from the Vijnana Bhairava and, in the context of bhakti, from the Shiva Stotravali of Utpaladeva. The sound of instrumental music can induce a state of absorption and identification with the supreme void of space, the condition of a sound. If one listens with undivided attention to the sounds of string instruments and others, which are played successively and are prolonged, then one becomes absorbed in the supreme ether of consciousness. Vijnana Bhairava 541. Jayadeva Singh adds the following notes. 1. The resonance of musical notes lasts for a long time, and being melodious, it attracts the attention of the listener. Even when it stops, it still reverberates in the mind of the listener. The listener becomes greatly engrossed in it. A musical note, if properly produced, appears to arise out of eternity and finally to disappear in it. When the music stops, it still vibrates in the memory. If the yogin does not allow his mind to wander to something else, but concentrates on the echo of the music, he will be absorbed in the source of all sound, via paravak, and thus will acquire the nature of Bhairava. Obviously, the same music can be experienced at different levels by different listeners, depending on their state of consciousness. As Abhinavagupta says in his Tantra Loka, the insensitive, ardaya, are unable to get merged or identified with the object of aesthetic enjoyment, in this case musical sound, which is ultimately consciousness itself. Jayaratha comments briefly on the two terms. In the world, those are called sensitive, sardaya, who experience a sense of wonder by identifying themselves with exceedingly beautiful music, etc. Others are known to have their hearts somewhere else. They are insensitive, ardaya. In the case of a sensitive person, the state of absorption may happen spontaneously. Another instance of music is given after the example of other sensual joys, such as sexual joy and the pleasure of eating and drinking, which are expressions of ways of reaching a state of bliss. When the mind of a yogi is one with the unparalleled joy of music and other aesthetic delights, then he is identified with it due to the expansion of his mind which has merged in it. The difference between the yogin and the aesthete listening to music is that the mind of the first has already been firmly concentrated and he hears the totality of sound, not the individual sounds. This leads to a state of identification with the source of sound. There are examples of other art forms which have different implications, i.e., the contemplation of the universe as a painting, which brings about joy, not disillusionment. The intense experience of dancing or of walking leads to a mystical state at the moment of the cessation of movement. If one moves round and round with the body and suddenly falls on the ground, then when the energy of agitation comes to an end, the supreme state arises. Most of the practices of Vijnana Bhairava are directed to the experience of the void, shunya, and the aesthetic experiences are no exception. It is not the particularity of the beauty of sound, nature, of an image, etc., which produces a state of wonder and of identification. It is rather the emptying of the mind of all vikalpas produced by an absorbing experience. The senses themselves are to be meditated upon as voids. By meditating on the five voids of the senses, which are like the various colors of the peacock's feathers, the yogin enters in the heart of the absolute void. Vijnana Bhairava, verse 32. Finally, Utpaladeva's Shiva Stotravali can throw a different light on the question raised in the title of this article. Its basic rasa is bhakti. There is no attempt at any systematic presentation, since its verses are a spontaneous outpouring of non-dual devotion, and yet there is a consistency and agreement with Utpala's theology. First of all, God is the exceedingly beautiful one, Vitata Lavanya. Samaraja explains the unsurpassed divine beauty as being due to the intensity of supreme bliss. It is that divine beauty which is the unending source of attraction in all other created beauty. The senses themselves are enlivened by the divine consciousness. Therefore, the very contact with the beautiful objects creates a sense of wonder and delight. That which bestows on all objects of beauty the property of giving wonder at the mere touch by that very principle, do those endowed with unwavering devotion worship your form. Ksemaraja explains this act of worship as a resting in the divine. Tvayeva Vishramyanti. Thus, the three main phases of this aesthetic mystical experience are 1. The touch of the beautiful object, 2. The sense of wonder and delight, Chamatkriti, 3. The worship of the divine form, vapu, i.e., seeing the body of pure consciousness in all things, which implies a state of merging or rest, Vishranti. The divine itself is the source of all this experience of beauty, as the very next verse says. Being self-luminous, you cause everything to shine, delighting in your form. You fill the universe with delight, reeling with your own bliss. You make the whole world dance with joy. Whether the approach is through bhakti, as in the Shiva Stotravali, or through a piercing of the senses to reach a state of void, as in the Vijnana Bhairava, one condition is the sensitivity, or shardayata, both aesthetic and mystical, and another condition is the intensity of the experience. Ksemaraja makes it clear in his Vimarsini on Shiva Sutra 112, Vishmaya Yoga Bhumika, as a person is struck with wonder by seeing something extraordinary, even so there is a pleasant surprise for the great yogi who notices in mute wonder and expansion in the power of his entire complex of senses as they come fully under the influence of the inner self, which is a mass of consciousness and full of unique, preeminent, and ever-new delight of I consciousness, which blossoms forth in the experience of the various objects of perception. The yogi has this experience in himself that is full of uninterrupted joy, a joy with which he never feels satiated. J. Singh, page 52. This yatha tatha is not a simple comparison. It actually implies that the same state of ecstasy or wonder can be reached, either triggered by an external extraordinary experience, or attained by an inner consciousness of stages of yoga, without any external cause. The first is mediated by the senses, the second needs no mediation. These differences are then related to the four upayas, depending on the level of consciousness of the one undergoing the experience. Generally, Anavapaya and the Shaktapaya would be mediated by some external or mental means, whereas Sambhavapaya and Anupaya do not require any cause or means. But in every stage of the Upayas, the experience would be one of Vishmaya, the joy of astonishment. Coming back to the question raised in the title, we can draw some general conclusions. One, based on the metaphysical insights of Trika, on the doctrines of Prakasha Vimarsha, Abhasha, Bimba Pratibimba, Pratyabhinjna, etc., the mystical experience is no doubt also aesthetical. First of all, it does not deny the positive role of the senses and of their objects in the realization of the divine, and the goal of all the upayas being a state of harmony, samatha, beauty is an essential part of this harmony. Finally, the divine self, Shiva, is beauty and delight, being ever united with the Shakti, who is herself Pratibha and Chamatkirti. On the other hand, the aesthetic experience has all the potential of being or becoming mystical, depending on the purity and sensitivity of the one undergoing it. In essence, it can be nothing else, because the very source of beauty is the divine Shiva, and the very cause for the wonder of delight is Shakti. Any real aesthetic experience is a spark of recognition, or it is nothing. A difference remains as to the degree of fullness. In the case of the mystical experience, the I, aham, is fully realized. In the case of the aesthetic experience, it may be only a glimpse. The difference lies in the degree of merging or identification, tanmayi bhava, and in the relative permanence of the identification. The sense experience serves thus as a door of entrance to the ultimate experience. This is the unique contribution of Kashmir Shaivism to an integral mysticism which does not exclude any human dimension but embraces every possible experience and at the same time pierces through it to the absolute. Anuttara.